Okay, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, esteemed panelists. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to welcome you to this plenary panel on holistic approaches to urban sanitation and water management. My name is Cecilia Jenga. I am the Director of Intergovernmental Support and Collective Progress at the UNFCCC, which is just located next door. Good morning and welcome to this session. Today we have gathered here to delve into the cross-sectoral nature of water and sanitation, exploring the interdependencies and core benefits with other sectors such as health, environment, energy, and waste management. In our ever-growing urban environments, the challenges surrounding sanitation and water management have become increasingly complex. As we face these challenges, it is essential that we adopt holistic approaches that go beyond water and sanitation sector alone. This session aims to shed some light on innovative solutions and comprehensive strategies that embrace urban water security as part of the entire water cycle within a watershed. Our esteemed speakers will explore a range of holistic approaches focusing on the diverse water sources and multiple water uses within urban settings. This is from drinking water to hygiene, to water for agriculture, industry, and biodiversity. They will emphasize the need for integrated solutions and address the full chain of sanitation. This includes capturing, storing, transporting, treating, and ultimately reusing or disposing of water. To ensure the effective urban water and sanitation management, it is therefore crucial to bridge the gap between city planning and essential services such as water and sanitation. Our panelists, our distinguished panel today, this afternoon, will highlight the significance of investing in both seaward and non-seaward technologies by linking those services to national development policies, legislation, and strategies, ministries of planning and finance, and how the Ministry of Finance specifically can play a pivotal role in driving sustainable urban development. Furthermore, this session calls for increased coordination, both horizontally across sectors and vertically across different tiers of authority and spatial scales, from local water users to water and sanitation operators and private sector, civil society, planning and finance authorities, and the various levels of government. Collaboration is key and is important to effectively address the challenges we face today. So during our panel discussion, I will be inviting here our distinguished speakers, it is their day, to share with us their expertise, their experiences, and insights. Together, we hope to gain from them a deeper understanding of the holistic approaches that can pave the way for sustainable and resilient urban water and sanitation systems. We look forward to a very lively discussion and session that will be informative and that will contribute to our collective efforts in shaping a better future for urban water sanitation management. Let us foster collaboration, exchange knowledge, and explore innovative solutions that will transform our cities into models of sustainability. Thank you, and let us begin our discussion on holistic approaches to urban sanitation and water management. Before we begin our panel discussion, and before I invite the panelists to come and take their seats here in front, we are really honored to have with us our distinguished keynote speaker, Satoko Kishimoto, Mayor and former GWOPA ISC member, to give us and deliver the keynote message. Welcome, Satoko.
Cecilia, no, I'm sorry, we've had a cancellation there. So we're going to go straight to the panel.
Okay, no, thanks. Thank you. So we'll go straight to the panel, and I hope we can receive the recorded message, which we can listen to after the panel discussion. So I'd like to invite the panelists here. I would like to welcome Alice, who is online. Alice Shrekongost. is the WASH Senior Program Officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and currently collaborating with regulators, utilities, international finance institutions, and research institutions to strengthen public sanitation services in low-income urban areas. Welcome, Alice, online. I'm also pleased to welcome Ibra Sow from PASA. And Ibra Sow joins us here from PASA, and he's an emptier by trade, and as of today, manages a company of about 40 trucks, giving employment to many staff and day laborers. He's also been the president of the Association of Sewers in Senegal since 2007 and president of the Pan-African Association of Sanitation Actors since 2019. A warm welcome to Ibra. You can join us here on the podium. I'd also like to welcome Jennifer Williams, the Executive Director of FCM Alliance. Welcome, Jennifer. Join us, please. I'd also like to welcome Benjamin, the Director General at Eau de Paris. Benjamin Gestine has been serving as CEO of the Eau de Paris, the drinking water utility of the city of Paris since 2016, member of the French Senior Civil Service, and he advocates for better synergies between public policies for a more systematic approach to challenges cities and territories face with regard to climate change. I don't know if Benjamin is here or joining us online. Okay. Next is Graham Alabaster, my former colleague at UN Habitat. Alabaster is chief of the Geneva office at UN Habitat, and he holds many caps and has spent many years in Nairobi, Kenya, and I had the honor and privilege to work with Graham for many years while at UN Habitat. Welcome, Graham. Next is my friend, Kobe Brands, the Deputy Executive Secretary of ICLE, Local Government for Sustainability. Kobe Brand is the Deputy Secretary General of ICLE, Local Governments for Sustainability, and also the Regional Director of ICLE Africa and the Global Director of ICLE's Cities Biodiversity Center. I've also had the privilege of working with Kobe for more than 10 years while I was in South Africa. A great welcome to you. Okay. I think I have not left out anybody out from the panel. I think we have everybody with us here. So I will begin with you, Ibra Sow. And as we said, Ibra might be speaking in French, so please have your earphones on so that you can be able to listen to him and interact with him after that later on. So Ibra, I'd like to raise one question with you. I'd like you to share with us what do you think are the most pressing issues to tackle in order for us to achieve SDG 6 in the urban context? What do you think are the most pressing issues to tackle and achieve SDG 6 in the urban context? In answering this question, I'd also like you to reflect on what shifts are currently taking place that can serve as inspiration, share with us some examples where possible, and who needs to be involved in these shifts, and all towards the achievement of SDG 6 in the urban context. Over to you, Ibra.
Merci beaucoup. C'est vraiment très gentil, madame, de m'avoir donné la parole. En somme, concernant les ODD 6, il faut bien préciser, je parlerai sur l'ODD 6.2. Les gens parlent souvent que l'ODD 6, on ne va pas atteindre. Mais pour l'ODD 6.2, on peut bien atteindre les objectifs. Seulement, il faut beaucoup de mesures d'accompagnement. Concernant l'assainissement, le problème en Afrique, c'est très simple. C'est les stations de gestion de boues de vidange. Sur pratiquement toutes les villes d'Afrique subsaharienne, il n'y a pas de station qui traite les boues de vidange. Ce qu'on fait là-bas, c'est comme la défécation à l'air libre. le pays qui a le plus de stations de bout de vidange, c'est le Sénégal, il en dispose 11. Si, par exemple, on demande aux personnes de faire la vidange, et une fois que les citernes pleines, ils n'auront pas où dépoter. C'est comme si on leur disait, prenez tous les fosses septiques, mais ne les dépotez nulle part. C'est pas possible. Donc il faut mettre des mesures d'accompagnement. Il faut que les gouvernements, les politiques locales puissent gérer cette situation en mettant en place plusieurs stations de traitement de boue de vidange. Ça, c'est un premier phénomène. L'autre, on a envoyé ce qu'on appelle un slogan, une ville, une station. Qu'il y ait au moins chaque ville une station de traitement de boue de vidange. Ça, c'est le minimum. Il y a un slogan qui a été lancé par APA et qui est labellisé au niveau du Forum mondial de l'eau. C'est là que tout le monde doit se concentrer. Dès qu'on règle cette situation, on peut bel et bien atteindre les ODD. Mais il y a aussi ce qu'on appelle les innovations. Maintenant, on ne parle plus de traitement de boue de vidange dans certains pays, on parle maintenant de valorisation des boues de vidange. Ces boues de vidange qui ont beaucoup d'utilité et que la majeure partie des pays commencent à utiliser et à voir les résultats. Ça, c'est un phénomène. L'autre, concernant les changements qui s'y est aujourd'hui, je pense que, comme je l'ai dit tantôt, aller sur plusieurs pays, vous allez voir, les gens ont commencé à mettre, par exemple, l'omniprocesseur à Dakar. C'est une nouvelle technologie qui a été mise sur place et qui fonctionne présentement très bien sur Town Pearl, par exemple. C'est une machine qui, à base des bouts de vidange, puisse produire de l'électricité, des cendres et de l'eau pour les eaux distillées qu'on met dans les batteries, dans les radiateurs, en tout cas des eaux de refroidissement. Avec les cendres, actuellement, on est en train de faire des briques pour, n'est-ce pas, servir de pavés qu'on met sur les rues. Voilà ce genre de valorisation qui font que demain, on peut même prétendre ne pas vidanger la fosse, n'est-ce pas, en se faisant payer, mais soit la vidanger gratuitement ou bien vidanger la fosse et payer pour vidanger la fosse. C'est dans cette rubrique-là, c'est vers ces élans-là qu'il va falloir, n'est-ce pas, s'aventurer pour amener, n'est-ce pas, l'assainissement à atteindre les ODD 6.2.
Okay, no, thank you very much for that contribution. Kobi, Ibra has spoken a lot about how we can leverage from technological innovation as a way, as a mechanism, and as a process towards achieving SDG 6. But I'd like to hear a little bit more from you. You know, where are we in achieving SDG 6? Have we made some progress at 2030? What will we say? If I can push that a little.
Cecilia, thank you very much. And I must say, it's always a pleasure to share these type of forums with you. Thank you very much for having ICLEI here. We are indeed long-standing friends and colleagues. Many different hats, but always the same dedication and absolute determination from you. So in terms of SDG 6, what I'm being told by the experts and what was a very resounding, very clear voice coming out of the New York UN Water Conference, only the second one in more than 40 years, that doesn't make sense to me, but anyway, it was really, really good to be there and for the community to gather there, is that we are not on track. We are really not on track. We may meet, and we have the technology. It's not about the technology. We may meet certain of the targets and indicators, but in terms of SDG 6 overall, we are not on the right path. But we're not alone. Many of the SDGs are not on the right path. So, I mean, the United Nations Secretary General warned us more than a year ago already that humanity is indeed waging a war against the planet, against nature. And I think that also goes for water. That's why I'm very thrilled that when we were at the CBD COP15, the biodiversity COP in Montreal in December last year, there was a very, very ambitious target that was set and agreed to by the parties, the 196 parties of the CBD. And that is, we probably all know this, but just let it sink in for a minute. 30% of all terrestrial and 30% of all ocean ecosystems should be restored and protected by 2030. That is 6 years from now. And us as water utilities and us in the water space, working with cities, working at multi-level governance frameworks, etc., we need to play our part. And I want to come back to the very interesting notion that was just tabled in the previous session. Should the GWOPAs expand their scope? I don't think the GWOPAs can be everything for every SDG. We have a very strong climate group. We've got a very strong biodiversity group. We've got the human rights group. We've got all these groupings activated around the development agenda globally. But we need to talk more to each other. And it needs to go beyond talking. We have to do together. We've got to learn each other's languages. We've got to learn what the differences are between us. And in that difference, find innovation. It's hard, it's uncomfortable, it's not something that comes easy. It's easy for us to stay in our safe spaces, to be a water engineer in a WOPS. That's very easy because it comes naturally and you've been doing it for decades. Work in a city's Department of Water comes naturally. But bring the two together, not many cities and their water utilities have a close enough relationship. And I'll just say, without going into the details of what actual indicators of SDG 6 are more on track than others, because I think some of you know that even better than I do, I would just like to say that there's one key factor here. That is, yes, let's work better together between cities and utilities, but we do also need to understand that water is such a cross-cutting issue with so many mandates still sitting at national level and even transboundary levels, that we really need a multi-level governance approach here. It needs to really feed up from even the smallest settlement or town, rural conditions, through to big cities, through to the level up provinces, states, etc., national governments, continental cooperation and international cooperation. And let us not forget what we do with water on land has an influence on what happens in our oceans and the other way around. So from here, many of us are going to the plastics discussions, INC2 in Paris, and we will be talking plastics pollutions in a new global treaty under the UN. We cannot separate water from that discussion. In 2 weeks' time, we will be here, the UNFCCC will gather here for their mid-year talks. They even talk about a mini COP in this very building. And they will also be talking water. Those of us that were in Egypt, we know how much and how high the water agenda was featured at the COP. And it's going to be no different in the upcoming climate COPs. The same happened in the biodiversity COP. So it's integrated, and that's, I think, where the solution lies, is in that integration, getting out of your comfort zone. But in terms of your question, SDG 6, no. Cecilia, no. We are not where we should be. A large part of it's got to do with the funding And also, how to get the funding means that you've got to have bankable, investable projects. And I don't think many of those cities that need them most do.
Thanks you very much, Kobe. I think you've raised some fundamental issues with regard to the need for a systems approach, an integrated approach. Yes, indeed, we are not on track. And I don't even think it's just the water and sanitation issue. I think we are not on track on many other internationally agreed, intergovernmentally agreed processes. So connectivity of agendas is crucial, from biodiversity to climate, to the urban agenda, to the sanitation approaches, etc. I'd like to come to you, Jennifer, and see and hear from you a little bit what is different about the type of holistic approaches that would be required in water and sanitation management in cities that we have today to address some of the fundamental gaps that have been mentioned here.
Thank you. You know, I think I share a lot of the same opinion and views that that Kobe just mentioned. It's not about the technology, and so again, coming back to this systems approach, an integrated approach, which also includes sanitation. You mentioned climate a lot, but didn't actually say sanitation. If we continue to have poorly managed sanitation that pollutes our waterways, groundwater, dumping directly into rivers and streams, we will never have clean water. And this also has an environmental impact as well. So one of the things I think in a holistic approach is actually tearing down some of the artificial constructions, constructs and barriers we've created amongst ourselves so that we can work in silos. And we've really tried to reduce things into a neatly compact pillar or initiative or silo to break up the complexity into smaller pieces, but we think that we're going to be able to put them back together. But I think we've seen that that model isn't working. It was not a successful model in the global pandemic that we all just endured. So we really need to change our way of thinking, which I think is the biggest thing that we can do, because I agree, we need to have a sense of urgency. 2030 is around the corner. I know it sounded far away a while ago, but it is rapidly getting closer. And so one of the things that I also was thinking about when preparing for this panel was there's the way that we teach engineering. We teach it as very objective and data-driven. And when we leave out the social components of that, the non-technical parameters, culture, access to technology, speed, we take away really important barriers that impact decision-making. And again, we try to simplify things into very neat data packages, and that's not what humans actually are. So if we really think about trying to solve some of these problems that plague our societies, they usually involve humans. Humans are messy. We don't fit neatly into this. And so when we try to remove that human component and put it into very objective data, we take away the human aspect of it, and we have a not very human-centered solution. So I think that's something we do need to. It also continues to uphold dominant viewpoints, which we know are discriminatory and continue to perpetuate inequality. So I think the biggest thing that we can all do that is free is to start to slowly shift our minds. And then I think that can open up doorways. I think I also liked what you said also about we want to stay in our safe place. Innovation doesn't actually come from comfort. Innovation comes from discomfort. So that's also something I would encourage you all to do, is to be a little bit uncomfortable for the remaining time that you're here at this conference and moving forward at the other ones as well. And then I think also your last point was really interesting too. Yes, there's a lot of cities and municipalities that don't have bankable, investable projects, but I think we also need to turn the coin and look at, are the criteria really mitigating the risks that we think that exist, or are we still upholding systems that don't actually solve inequality? And so really challenging funders and donors to rethink about business as usual. We all agreed during COVID that business as usual was not reaching specific populations. And we talked about making changes, and I think our desire to return to normalcy has blocked a little bit of that, and we've kind of gone back to business as usual. I've done it myself, and I'm now sort of just trying to reprioritize again. Thank you.
No, thanks very much, Jennifer. You've touched on a key fundamental shift in terms of paradigm and the social dimension, the issue of equity and human rights, and placing that right at the center of our holistic approaches. But I really want to come to the guru of engineering and ask him about the evolution and the trends and how you have experienced this transition towards more holistic approaches in water and sanitation, and what this really has meant, not only for policy, but addressing the needs of communities who are aspiring to have equal access to water and sanitation. Dr. Graham Alabaster.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Delighted to be here and amongst friends and colleagues. I think, by a few sort of, I say, circumstances beyond our control, the climate influence, COVID, and all these other things, we've been pushed out of our comfort zone a little bit. And I think now is a time when we're starting to realize that, life isn't going to be simple from the future on if we don't move forward and really rethink in a holistic way, not just water and sanitation together, but, sanitation and the broader sanitation cycle, if you like, of wastewater, of on-site sanitation, and indeed solid waste management and drainage. When you get into the urban dimension, we all know in low-income settlements in developing world how these huge densities, these inequities that exist, they've been there. When I started work in the sector 30, 40 years ago, it was still the same. We still have these high densities. But the difference is now that they're becoming, some of these informal settlements are becoming so huge because of other influences, again, migration due to natural disasters and conflicts, that we're seeing all of these things happening together. So we've got climate, we've got COVID, we've got the rapid additions to urbanization. So what we used to do before was we used to plan separately for the low-income communities and the middle-income and the high-income communities. We can't do that any longer because basically all of the people who live in the low-income settlements are usually the economic workforce for the city. We can't expect a city to grow and expand unless we look after the poorest in the city. If you don't look after the poorest in the city, outbreaks of disease and their general lack in poor standards of living will mean that you're affecting the output of the city and you're affecting the city to function. So there's a few things that we need to start to do to bridge those inequities. We all know about the huge difference in prices between what the poor pay for clean water and what the more wealthy do in the same city. We've got to find a way of reducing those inequalities. This is a key area where particularly water utilities can come in. There's been many good examples around where social tariffs, for example, in South Africa, a social tariff has been made available to the urban poor so they can get the lifeline tariff of water at more or less at cost. This is the only way that we're going to do that. We can rely on the good work of NGOs, community groups to a certain extent, but the utilities have to take on board the issue of supplying water and sanitation and wastewater services to these communities. This is the most important thing for me, to overcome this inequity. The other thing is that we've got to become more mindful of water and waste as a resource. We all hear about the circular economy, we've heard about it for a while, but now, because of these other influences, it's going to be even more critical. If we start to look at the water, and particularly water scarcity, we're going to find many regions in this planet where they've never experienced water scarcity before, where they're going to suddenly be affected. The price of energy has gone up recently. The cost of water is going to accelerate because of energy. So we've got to do what we can to conserve. So we've got to look much more seriously at water demand management, at reducing leakages and losses, and discouraging profligate use of water, which still goes on in all parts of the world. Okay, let's be honest about it. We've also got to look at wastewater as an easily available resource to augment those freshwater supplies. So we should be looking in situations where we have infrastructure that collects wastewater, we should be treating that wastewater to a level that can be reused for food production, for beautification, for greening of cities. So with these two things in tandem, looking at water, addressing the inequalities, looking at reducing profligate use, but then also considering how we might reuse wastewater, we will find a huge improvement. I was very pleased to hear that plastic pollution was mentioned. How does plastic pollution get into the ocean? It either goes in a river or in a sewer. So therefore, the question of plastic pollution should be on the responsibility of the utilities who treat wastewater, I think. I mean, this is something to do. So there's a few examples there of what we can do. I think it's all very possible to do, and I don't think, it's not about having grand national level plans. It's about local level action. It's about cities and their utilities working in partnership, bringing in the social elements of managing these issues, which Jennifer so eloquently talked about, and looking at the whole package. But that has to be driven from the local level. Yes, you can legislate at national level. Ministries, of course, have their role to play, but the impetus and the catalytic sort of kickoff should come from the local level. Thank you.
Thanks for emphasizing that point, and that's the point I want to bring in Alice in. And Alice, I have a question for you, and just building on what Graham and the other panelists have mentioned, I would like you to share with us, what do you see as the key opportunities for water operator partnerships to support shifts to a more holistic urban approaches? And if you can also touch on the issue of equity and what the role of these partnerships play or could play, I'd be happy with that. Thanks, Alice.
Great. Thank you, Cecilia, and thanks all for some really great comments already. I think I have a bit of an echo. Let me check that. So I think in terms of the WAPs, one of the things that the foundation has really been advocating for strongly in the way we use our voice and the way we fund our partnerships is to really amplify the importance of a public sector approach to urban sanitation, and one that focuses on outcomes and inclusive outcomes as opposed to tying a public mandate specifically to one technology input type. And so we look at what utilities have been doing in more, frankly, more progressive countries around outcomes. We see that in the Philippines, the mandate for utilities has been to provide sanitation, not to provide sewage only or septic tanks only, but really to look at what the outcome is that they want for their cities and invest accordingly. There aren't that many countries that have that kind of joint mandate where a utility and or municipality have an explicit funded mandate to advance an outcome as opposed to an input. So when we look at what the sector is doing and discussing now, it's really to shift the focus to think about outcomes as opposed to inputs. And when we think about outcomes, it changes the game entirely in terms of what utilities are responsible for, how they need to do their business, who they need to be considering, and what tools they have at their disposal. A lot of utility engineers have never been trained to look at anything besides sewers. They haven't been trained to take into account water supply levels when designing their sewers. Projects aren't designed that way. Financing isn't designed that way. And so when the mandates actually shift, when there's a legal shift to expand a mandate for utilities and or municipalities to take up outcomes versus inputs, you see there being an incentive to shift the way business is done. And when that shift happens, that's when there's an opening to start having conversations with people like Ibraso and emptiers, private sector emptiers that have been marginalized and have been doing the work of basically utility work informally for years and years. When the mandate shifts for utilities, those people are invited in. And then there's a process of figuring out, how do we make contracts with these folks? How do we deliver good services to them so that they can deliver good services to our customers? When you shift a mandate, you have a different set of KPIs and a different set of data that need to be collected and reported to your regulators, that are needed by your commercial departments, by your customer service departments, and that pushes innovation in data collection and software management and the soft infrastructure that's needed to really make utilities work well for the customers. Um, I think these are just a few of the innovations that come out of formalizing this mandate. In terms of WAPs, there's a whole list of these innovations that need to happen when you shift a mandate toward outcomes. In terms of how WAPs play a role, nobody really knows how to do this well. We have really fantastic examples in the Philippines, in Malaysia, where for decades they've already been executing this mandate. How do you take um, a situation where utilities are getting this mandate from newly receiving this mandate, and then figuring out what to do from scratch? We've already heard this week from really fantastic folks, from Y in India, from Nakuru in Kenya. Um, I think there have been several folks who've talked about components of work, from Lusaka, from Kampala. I think those folks are figuring out what to do real time. WAPs play an absolutely critical role for the cities that are really entering this in real time, newly, with huge populations that are unserved, with established utility systems and municipality systems that are kind of entrenched in an input-based uh, approach and have input-based systems, and that are needing to shift the way they do work. The WAPs ability to partner utilities so that they can be learning together. Sometimes there's a mentor and a mentee, and sometimes there's value in learning together, because different cities are moving ahead in different ways. So Y is doing some really cool work on scheduled desludging that we heard about earlier today. That is informing the work that Kampala and Lusaka are doing. Zambia is doing some amazing work at the national level around integrating data systems across ministries at the national level and at the local level, to think about, how do utilities and municipality databases and data systems work together so that they're making smarter decisions at the local level and filtering that up. That work that they're doing is also being used in places like Bangladesh, where they have an IMIS system that is top down currently, and they're working to build it bottom up. So where some cities are further ahead on data systems or on contracts with their emptiers or on business models around tariffs and cross subsidies, there's a lot of opportunity for cross learning. And I think the WAPs are not only important, um, across countries, but within countries, and thinking through how WAPs can advance intra-country learning between different utilities and between cities and utilities. I think there's just so much potential there. We see cities as vibrant, growing places filled with, uh, so many great ideas and so many brilliant people. There's no reason why we can't solve this. I think the challenge is huge, but once you formalize that mandate and you really put some good incentives in place, we are seeing so many cities already moving quickly. Nakuru, I think we've heard from several times this week already. The movement is happening, and the more cities can talk to one another, the more they'll learn and the more they'll innovate together. Thank you.
I think what I hear from you is that shifts are already happening, whether it's in terms of business models, the way communities are organizing themselves, the way partnerships are being forged from community to national level, whether it's in terms of data interoperability. This is already happening. And I'd like to turn over to Benjamin, and I'd like you to reflect and share with us how you've perceived these shifts, has this meant for you as a person that works within the utilities? Who needs to be involved? And what are those key elements that need, or levers that need to be put in place to get us to the next level of this shift?
Bonsoir à tous. J'espère que vous m'entendez correctement. J'ai eu quelques problèmes de connexion. Et si vous m'entendez, je suis très heureux d'être le deuxième intervenant à parler en français. D'habitude, je suis un peu tout seul, donc là, la langue française est bien présentée ce soir. Pour répondre à votre question, Cécilia, qui doit être impliqué dans une approche holistique de la gestion de l'eau dans les villes, j'ai envie de dire tout le monde. Alors, si c'est une approche holistique, il faut associer tout le monde. Alors évidemment, on pense tout de suite aux institutions, aux municipalités, aux utilities, aux opérateurs. On pense aussi aux autorités nationales. Et moi, je voudrais vraiment insister sur le fait qu'il faut associer la population, les gens, quels qu'ils soient. Alors, je vais essayer, dans tout ce que je vais vous dire dans quelques instants, d'être très concret et de prendre des exemples de Paris, de la ville que j'ai l'honneur de servir. Et donc, associer la population, quand on est une ville comme Paris de 2,5 millions d'habitants à peu près, 3 millions de personnes qui viennent tous les jours à Paris, c'est un vrai défi. Et donc, on le fait depuis 10 ans à Haut-de-Paris, en essayant à chaque fois d'inventer de nouveaux systèmes d'association des populations. On a commencé avec une initiative qui était vraiment très originale à l'époque, qui est l'Observatoire parisien de l'eau, qui est une structure citoyenne associée à l'opérateur à la ville de Paris, qui réfléchit sur les questions d'eau, qui donne des avis. Et là, on est en train de passer à une étape supplémentaire avec un budget participatif de l'eau qui permet de demander aux Parisiennes, aux Parisiens, aux habitants, ce qu'ils voudraient qu'on fasse avec l'argent de leur facture d'eau. Et c'est extrêmement important parce que si on veut avoir une approche holistique, il faut aussi que les gens prennent conscience de l'importance de l'eau dans leur vie et prennent conscience de l'impact de leur comportement sur la ressource en eau, la manière dont on la gère. Donc, premier élément de réponse, associer la population par tous les moyens possibles et imaginables, qu'ils soient digitaux ou plus physiques en fonction des contextes dans lesquels on est. Deuxième élément de réponse, il faut des symboles. Si on veut changer et passer d'une approche sectorisée, en silo, qui caractérise très bien les utilities, qui caractérise très bien les services publics en général, et à peu près dans tous les contextes, qu'on soit en France, un pays développé, mais quand même un peu bureaucratique, ou qu'on soit ailleurs, on a l'habitude de travailler chacun dans sa boîte et ça marche bien comme ça. Si on veut changer ça, il faut des symboles. Je vais vous en donner quelques-uns sur les symboles parisiens en matière de gestion de l'eau globale, et puis après, je vais partir sur des exemples un peu plus sur l'eau potable. Premier symbole, on va pouvoir se baigner dans la Seine. J'en parle volontairement, c'est une commande de Julie Perkins qui voulait qu'on en parle. Se baigner dans la Seine, ça a l'air de rien, mais ça montre aux Parisiens, aux Parisiennes, aux touristes, aux Français, à tous les gens qui viennent à Paris, qu'il y a eu un travail considérable de reconquête de la qualité de l'eau au niveau du bassin, basin level, pas simplement au niveau de la ville. Il faut le montrer de manière concrète, sinon ça ne marche pas. Si c'est que du travail technique fait par les opérateurs d'eau potable, par les opérateurs d'assainissement, par ceux qui gèrent l'eau pluviale, personne ne voit le résultat, ça n'intéresse personne. Il faut le montrer. Donc se baigner dans la Seine, pour les Jeux Olympiques et Paralympiques de Paris 2024, c'est démontrer à tout le monde que bien gérer l'eau ensemble, ça a des résultats concrets. Deuxième exemple, toujours à l'échelle de la ville, on va réussir à Paris dans quelques années, c'est pas tout de suite, c'est un peu après la baignade, à redécouvrir une rivière qui avait été enterrée par le développement de la ville. C'est une rivière qui s'appelle la Bièvre. C'est aussi le symbole, et il faut des symboles concrets, de la reconquête du milieu naturel, de la reconquête de la qualité de l'eau et de la reconquête de la biodiversité qui va avec. Et puis, troisième élément de symbole, donc qui concerne nous directement à Haut-de-Paris, l'opérateur parisien de l'eau potable, Water Utilities de la ville de Paris. Il faut des symboles. Alors, Graham, tout à l'heure, mentionnait la nécessité de lutter contre la pollution par le plastique. Bon ben voilà, deux symboles de la lutte de pollution contre le plastique. Une carafe d'eau et l'indispensable gourde, water bottle, nécessaire pour éviter de consommer des bouteilles en plastique qui finissent immanquablement par polluer les rivières et les océans. Et donc, qu'est-ce qu'on fait? C'est les opérateurs d'eau, c'est nous, de Paris, qui avons promu l'utilisation des gourdes et des carafes d'eau et distribué des gourdes. Alors, des gourdes, on en a distribué des dizaines de milliers. Quand je dis des dizaines de milliers, c'est sans doute un peu plus. Et puis je vous donne un dernier symbole de ce qu'on peut faire pour montrer une approche holistique complète. Vous allez voir, ça va peut-être vous paraître un peu bizarre. Voilà le dernier symbole. Je ne sais pas si vous voyez bien sur vos écrans. Ce que je tiens dans la main, c'est un paquet de lentilles. Alors, le rapport entre un paquet de lentilles et la gestion de l'eau dans la ville de Paris, ben, ces lentilles, elles sont produites par des agriculteurs, partenaires d'eau de Paris, qui se sont convertis à l'agriculture biologique, organic farming, pour éviter de polluer l'eau à la source. Et pareil, il faut un symbole concret. Ces lentilles, elles sont servies dans les cantines parisiennes. Les enfants de Paris les mangent, leurs parents le voient, et ça permet de prendre conscience de toute cette chaîne de protection de l'eau qui nous permet d'avoir une meilleure eau et un meilleur environnement. Je finirai peut-être par un dernier élément sur les tendances qu'on voit à Paris, mais qu'on voit surtout un peu ailleurs. Et là, c'est presque un vœu que je forme pour la ville de Paris pour laquelle je travaille. On commence à voir dans beaucoup d'endroits des réflexions assez puissantes sur les changements, de modèles de financement, comment on finance les actions holistiques en matière de protection de l'eau. La seule facture d'eau et d'assainissement finit par ne plus suffire. Il va falloir trouver des cofinancements ailleurs. Et puis, des opérateurs. On s'aperçoit qu'il y a quand même une tendance assez forte en France, mais la France étant un petit peu en retard sur l'Allemagne, sur les pays scandinaves, le Danemark en particulier. On s'aperçoit qu'on va avoir des opérateurs qui vont assumer de plus en plus de compétences, qui vont regrouper des compétences pour justement avoir cette vision holistique, mais non pas théorique, pratique, sur la manière dont il faut changer la ville pour mieux gérer la ressource en eau sur l'ensemble du cycle, à toutes les échelles, du niveau du bassin jusqu'au niveau de la ville, mais aussi à toutes les échelles de temps. Mieux gérer l'eau aujourd'hui, avec une très forte capacité d'anticipation pour anticiper le changement climatique et ses effets, pour anticiper les phénomènes migratoires et pour anticiper l'évolution des villes à 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 ans. Voilà, merci beaucoup.
No, thanks very much, Benjamin, and also for introducing a new concept, a new approach in terms of international cooperation and the need for international symbols in order to drive us, to achieving that holistic and integrated approach, as water has no boundaries. We know, it goes beyond our own national boundaries, and therefore the need for us to have this kind of international standards. I see time's running out, but I want to give the panelists a chance to reflect on one particular aspect. So I'll pick one thing you mentioned. I'll come over to you first. Kobe, you mentioned financing. Within the climate change realm, we're still waiting for the 100 billion. So how do you see this happening in the water and sanitation space?
It needs to happen at scale. We need to take hands. We need to understand that, yes, we've heard the technologies there. I feel very hopeful. I feel very inspired by what I've been hearing over these last 2 days and what's still to come in this meeting. The fact that so many people are here together virtually and in person, so many skilled people with decades and decades of knowledge and dedication gives me hope. The innovation we've just heard from Paris, the innovation we've heard from the many examples from the Gates Foundation, from everywhere in each panel since we started here, it's a message of yes, we can. So how do we get there in terms of finance? I think, Jennifer, you raised the issue that maybe finance need to look at themselves as well. Maybe some of these funds need to see what they're asking from local governments and utilities to put on the table before they are going to be more risky to invest. Well, I think the common theme that I also heard and that we also said in New York from a city's perspective is that if you're not allowing yourself as a financier, private or public, to step out of your comfort zone and take the risk and walk that path with a utility or with a city, even if it doesn't make immediate sense in terms of financial return on investment, that bottom line of profit, even if that doesn't make sense for the near future, not taking action is far, far more risky, not only for the world, but for you as a financier, for you as a private sector and a public sector company funding development work. We have to understand that not all projects are going to be fully bankable in terms of making a profit in 1 or 2 or 3 or 5 years. But we've got to actually say, what is the cost of inaction? And really, it's up to cities and utilities and those engineers in those fields to make those sums, to show, as we heard from Durban, eThekwini municipality today, how much they save by investing in nature-based solutions, for instance, that prevent the infrastructure from ailing and failing. And I just want to say one last thing, Cecilia, very quickly about infrastructure. We now have a global energy crisis. In my country, it's very, very heartfelt. Sometimes we go for up to 10 plus hours a day without electricity in our homes, in our lives. What is even more scary is that the water infrastructure built for those what we call load shedding moments, blackouts, planned blackouts, scheduled blackouts. The water infrastructure is not built. The wastewater, neither the potable water infrastructure systems are built to be switched on and off the whole time. So they are under severe pressure. And what is the biggest issue for engineers in cities when the lights go down is the question, are our water pumps going to make it? Because we can still cook and do lots of things without electricity, but we have to have water on a daily basis, especially the poorest in the informal settlements. And I think that is something that we need to be very honest about. The cost of not coming out of your comfort zone as a financier. And I hope financiers are listening and attending the GWAPA. If not this GWAPA, let's make sure they're in the room for the next one, because we do need to engage with them in very honest discussions. And that would be my main thing. We need to, or everybody needs to step out of their comfort zones. And sometimes if we talk about small cities and small municipalities, any one of them is not, their projects are not big enough to attract investors. So it's also a duty that the GWAPA community and organizations like you and Habitat, ICLEI, etc. can play, is to aggregate these projects into sizable, scalable, bankable projects that would attract the European Investment Bank, that would attract the World Bank, etc., to invest in. So that would be my answer, Cecilia. We can go on. Yeah. Finance is a big topic.
I know, thanks. Yeah, thanks for that. Jennifer, you brought in the social dimension as a very critical element of achieving these holistic approaches. I'd just like you to share with me what you would consider as a key pathway to ensure that urban planning for water and sanitation, particularly when it's driven by engineers, incorporates this social dimension, the whole issue of equity as part and parcel of the overall planning.
Yeah, I liked what Benjamin mentioned about all the symbols that they're using to represent outcomes that they want that the public can easily understand. And I think that's one of the biggest mistakes that we've used when we talk about the circular economy, particularly in waste reuse. We don't do the community outreach and the community education to explain to people what is happening to the waste that then makes it safe, because we send very mixed messages. We say, your waste is full of pathogens, it's going to make you sick, but then I need you to trust us because something happens in the middle and now we're saying it's safe to be reused and you can put it to water your garden or to use as fertilizer, and we haven't really explained or reassured them why and brought them along on the journey in language that they can understand. So I think community engagement is really important, the education. So all of the programs that start with the youth in schools. Kids are easier to reach than adults, we know this. So just really trying to educate on what the circular economy is, even for some of our, starting with our own families. I think that's really important, particularly where there are cultural, this is extremely important where there are cultural or religious deeply held beliefs about cleanliness or water use. I think really finding a sensitive way to explain this is going to be really important for success. Yeah.
Thanks. Alice, over to you. You spoke about the importance of data and the need to strengthen the mechanisms of data collection, data use, and I'd move it to evidence-based decision-making in the area of water and sanitation. We know how traditionally our national bureaus of statistics collect data on sanitation and water. What advice would you give to the national bureaus of statistics in order to strengthen this, to achieve this holistic integrated approach?
This is a favorite topic of mine. So I think I'm going to, sorry, taking a echo again. I think that the first point is the data that get collected right now, and I would say this is not just for the National Bureau of Statistics, but also for all of our global partners who are pursuing data collection to close the global data gap around SDGs, for water and sanitation around the JMPs. There are lots of international efforts to collect data on the status of services. At the national level, likewise, there are lots of estimations going on. At the project finance level, there's just so much money that goes into data for baselines and end lines. And in actuality, a lot of the national and global work is based on the goal of improving services. Sorry, I have a guest here. Is based on the goal of improving services. But then when you look at what would happen once you identify that gap, who are the service authorities who have to close the service gap? If they don't have data systems in place to help guide them understand where are the unserved customers, where are the informal customers, how much are they already paying? I think Ibra or Graham may have mentioned what the difference is between what informal settlement consumers pay for informal substandard services. What are they already paying? And what's the business model that a utility could use to actually improve their services, capture some of that revenue, and most likely reduce the cost for those households and improve their quality of service if they organize the markets in that space. When you start looking at data at the service authority level, at the local level, and you start investing in building data systems for improving service delivery and not circumventing broken data systems by having projectized baselines and end lines, but really building data systems for decision making, then you basically solve your national and your global data gap problems, and you start to see the foundations around which you can create some of those bankable projects that are missing. You can think about, are those bankable projects going to be sustained in the long run? Is there a revenue stream? Is there a business model to make sure that the concrete and rebar that's being invested in is actually going to translate into services, or is it going to just be infrastructure? Those questions we cannot answer without service authority level data systems, and we can't make progress, frankly, on the SDGs if those data systems aren't inclusive of really creative mechanisms for including informal communities in understanding what the service market is, how big it is, what it looks like, what people are paying already, not just counting toilets, but really looking at service systems and what it takes to plan for services as formal parts of utility business, and not look at them as separate project places for projects or one-off interventions.
Thanks, Alice. Graham, 6.5 years to 2030. And we are told by COBE that we are not on track. So what do you, and we already know that the low-income settlements are still not where they need to be in terms of access to water and sanitation. What do you think should be put in place with regard to the framework of the global GWOP program to ensure that we make some progress, some great strides towards meeting our targets?
That's not a simple question to answer, but I'll try. I think, we heard a little bit about this idea of delegated management models that Elise referred to. We can actually do something a bit similar with collection of information and data, because we are rapidly, we really are underestimating the level of coverage and access to services that people have, because don't forget, most informal settlements are not counted in surveys. Okay, we know that, right? So even the statistics that we're seeing don't include the urban poor. And by 2050, right, not much that further than 2030, 70% of the world's going to live in an urban agglomeration of some sort. And the other issue, which the other quoted statistics, which we talk about all the time, is that 70% of those urban areas that will exist in 2050 have not yet been built. So there's a huge opportunity right now to start to see how we can not only plan for increasing service coverage for the urban communities, but also what we can plan for the future to ensure that those places have the services right from the word go as they expand. Now this, as we've heard at many different events here, is a municipal city planning responsibility. There's nobody else who has responsibility for that. They know the expansion, they know the urbanization, they know how the urban plans of the future have to look. So I think that the GWOPA community can help to give the data and information to the local authorities to understand and predict what the needs are going to be. And I think, I mean, I've always felt that city leaders, and also including the heads of utilities, are in this unique position in that they've, yes, got to implement national or regional government guidance, but they have their finger on the pulse of the communities that they serve. So they are the best people to articulate the needs of the poorest and to understand what goes on. So I think that, with the GWOPA colleagues, with the support of utilities, using the communities that our colleague from Paris has talked about, as a sort of human sensor web to understand, will enable us to have a much better, accurate prediction of what's needed to serve those poor urban communities, or all communities, as we approach 2030. So that's, that for me is something that we can contribute as GWOPA, as UN Habitat, but all of us can contribute to. I think the other thing is that, and this builds a little bit from what Alice was saying, is, if we don't have data, we can't predict the investments we need. And in addition to being the custodian for SDG 11, UN Habitat looks after 631, which is the indicator for wastewater. That falls on my desk. And the thing that really I worry about is that, and I follow this, we can't make a global estimate yet for 6.3 because we only have data for 20% of the world's population for total wastewater, and for a stunning 4% of the world's population for industrial and commercial wastewater. 4%, and here we are, we're 2/3 of the way through the SDG period, and we still aren't able to report on that indicator, right? This for me is tragic. It's one of the most underreported parts of SDG 6. So, we need to use the capacity and the experience of water utilities and their partners, and by outreach, the communities that they serve, to populate this data properly, because if we don't get that data, we can't go and ask the financiers for what we need. We can't, without knowing the populations we're going to serve, understand the investments we need. Whether you're choosing network systems or on-site systems, it doesn't matter. You still need to have the data to quantify those investment needs, and we're nowhere near understanding that. It's a bit of a sort of, stab in the dark when a plan's put together for a water and sanitation project. It doesn't consider all of the elements. So without this better data, we're not going to be able to do that. We can as well, let's be very honest about it. We're very glad that there was an SDG for water. It was not certain that there was going to be one. We're lucky that we have one. We're very happy that wastewater's in there, aside from sanitation, because it was necessary to understand that. But, in the next iteration, whatever follows the SDGs, we now can adapt some of those ideas. We can bring in some of these ideas of more water conservation. We can really put in indicators about the circular economy, what we need to do, how we need to get there, because there isn't. It's alluded to in the current SDGs, but there's no indicator associated with reuse, for example. So there's many things to do, and WOPs and utilities are central to making that contribution to help get this data so that we can make these decisions. Thanks.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, you spoke about coverage, and we still know that even in 2030, there will be a percentage. I don't want to quantify it, whether it will be huge or small. My wish is that it's very small, but we know there will be gaps in terms of ensuring access to sufficient and adequate water and sanitation services. Mr. Ibra, so you spoke about technological innovation. And I just want you to go a little bit deeper in terms of sharing with us where you feel there are possibilities of solutions to address that coverage gap. And where would those solutions be? Are they within reach? And what would be required, if not within reach, to access this, particularly for the low-income settlements?
Merci beaucoup, madame. Donc, ce qu'il faudra savoir, c'est que, en somme, la globalité de l'eau et de l'assainissement, je ne dirais pas qu'on fasse la séparation, mais qu'on puisse faire la distinction. Et que si on globalise, souvent, c'est l'eau qui domine, l'assainissement est laissé en reste. Et moi, je parle dans le cadre de l'assainissement, c'est ce que je maîtrise le mieux. Donc, pour vous dire que c'est comme une équipe de football où le camp adverse demande à l'autre camp de venir marquer des buts, il enlève le gardien, il enlève les défenseurs, mais les autres ne peuvent pas marquer de but. Il y a un problème. Ce problème, c'est quoi? C'est les politiques. Si vous mettez toutes les dispositions nécessaires pour atteindre les ODD et que les politiques ne s'engagent pas là-dessus, on ne parviendra pas. On n'y parviendra pas, ce n'est pas possible. Donc ce qu'il faudra d'abord, c'est d'abord que les politiques s'engagent, n'est-ce pas, pour faire avancer les choses, mais aussi qu'il faut qu'il y ait un bon plaidoyer pour inciter les uns et les autres, n'est-ce pas, à sortir ce qu'ils ont au fond d'eux-mêmes pour quand même mettre sur place des technologies. C'est pourquoi à chaque fois on demande à ce qu'on encourage la recherche pour pouvoir mettre sur pied des nouvelles technologies, n'est-ce pas, nous permettant d'avoir une meilleure approche, n'est-ce pas, à ce qu'on puisse avoir atteindre les ODD. Bien qu'on dise que personne ne pourra atteindre les ODD en 2030, mais quand même, je parle encore une fois sur l'assainissement. Peut-être même si on n'y atteint pas, on va quand même changer beaucoup de choses. Mais il faut l'implication, n'est-ce pas, des politiques. Aujourd'hui, si vous avez des financements à donner aux politiciens dans des pays, 85% des gouvernements vous diront que mettez autre part, mais pas à l'eau ni à l'assainissement. Les 15% qui vous diront mettez dans l'assainissement, les 10% vont vous dire, mettez dans l'assainissement collectif. L'assainissement collectif ne nous permettra pas d'atteindre les objectifs. Les 5% vous diront mettez dans l'assainissement autonome. Donc, pour vous dire que c'est 100%, il n'y a que 5% des politiques qui vous demanderont d'investir sur l'assainissement autonome. Et cet assainissement autonome-là, et dans les pays sud-sahariens, il n'y a que cet assainissement autonome qui peut nous faire atteindre les ODD. L'assainissement coûte très cher. Pour l'entretenir, il faut très cher. Pour maintenir aussi, c'est très cher. Les pays en voie de développement ou les pays sous-développés n'ont pas les ressources nécessaires pour pouvoir gérer l'assainissement collectif. Il faut tendre vers l'assainissement autonome, que chacun s'autogère. C'est là où se trouvent les solutions. Voilà ce que j'avais à dire.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Ibraso. Benjamin, back to you and the utilities. Utilities have continued to feature, and I believe will continue to feature quite prominently in the conversations here the next few days. If you could just try and share with us some of your thoughts and reflections from what you've heard from others, the need for this integrated approach in partnerships, the role of utilities also in ensuring that data is available for decision making, and that the lack of data that was mentioned also by Graham for informing SDG 6. What do you think are the key issues that utilities have to address in order for you to be able to participate effectively in addressing SDG 6?
La première chose, c'est qu'un opérateur, c'est un instrument, c'est un outil. C'est un outil au service d'une collectivité. Alors, la plupart du temps, c'est au niveau municipal. Ça peut être à d'autres niveaux, régionaux ou nationaux, mais généralement, c'est un outil au service des villes, pour parler du contexte urbain. Donc, la première chose dont on a besoin, c'est d'avoir un contact régulier, de confiance et ouvert, pour dire les choses simplement, avec nos collectivités de référence. C'est comme ça qu'on a accès à l'information, c'est comme ça qu'on a accès aux données, aux data, c'est comme ça qu'on a accès aux autres politiques publiques qui vont permettre à une utility dans le domaine de l'eau potable, dans le domaine de l'assainissement, d'essayer de contribuer à d'autres objectifs. Adaptation au changement climatique, alimentation durable, résilience, inclusion sociale, enfin tout ce que vous voulez. Donc première chose, un opérateur, une utility, doit être ancré avec sa collectivité de référence. Deuxième chose dont on a besoin, c'est d'être constitué en réseau. Parce qu'un opérateur tout seul, il n'aura la richesse que de sa propre expérience. S'il appartient à des réseaux, GWOPA est un réseau, et on en a beaucoup d'autres. Donc, nous, pour Haute-Paris, on a le réseau français des régies, France au public. On a aussi le réseau européen des régies d'eau et d'assainissement, Aqua Publica Europea. Si on n'est pas ancré dans des réseaux, on a une expérience qui est limitée, une capacité à les partager, à s'enrichir qui est limitée. Donc, on a besoin de travailler en réseau. Et ces réseaux-là vont nous donner accès à un certain nombre de données, et des données qui sont pour nous vitales. Je pense notamment à des données de comparaison, c'est-à-dire, moi, quand on fait une action donnée à Haute-Paris et qu'on me dit qu'elle coûte X, si je ne sais pas qu'à côté, elle peut coûter X moins 10% ou X moins 15%, je n'aurais pas forcément l'idée d'aller demander aux équipes si on peut faire un peu mieux, un peu moins cher ou un peu plus vite. Voilà. Donc, deuxième idée, c'est appartenir à des réseaux. Et troisième idée pour maximiser la contribution des opérateurs à l'atteinte des objectifs de développement durable, et ça dans tous les contextes, que ce soit dans les contextes, on va dire, de pays développés, de grandes villes comme Paris, ou dans des contextes plus ruraux, ou de pays en voie de développement. Moi, je crois très fortement à cette question des utilities à plusieurs compétences, multi-utilities. À minima, pour ce qui concerne l'eau, eau et assainissement, ensemble. Et on voit bien que les modèles les plus performants en matière d'inclusion sociale, en matière de progrès technique, en matière d'approche holistique, en matière d'efficacité même économique de ce qu'elles font, c'est des utilities qui gèrent plusieurs services publics ensemble et qui cherchent à maximiser les synergies entre elles.
Thank you very much. We've already gone 26 minutes past the time that was allocated to us. I will not attempt to do a broad summary of what has emerged out of this conversation with the panelists. I think you've all had a chance to listen, but I've heard issues related around how we strengthen the GWOPs in terms of the partnerships, the importance of trust. When you're building relationships, trust becomes crucial, and not only at the local level, but also national and even internationally. The issues of equity, inclusion being very critical. The need for bringing in the social dimension, the issue of connectivity of agendas, and therefore issues of plastics, biodiversity, climate change, and sanitation being addressed in a much more integrated and holistic approach. The centrality of the means of implementation, the finance, technology transfer, technology innovation, but also the capacities to develop bankable projects, the whole importance and centrality of data, and data not only on what we collect at the national level, but what would be required to inform SDG 6, and that there are still huge data gaps in terms of evidence and decision making. How we can leverage from urbanization and the opportunities that urbanization brings, and not just focusing on the challenges, but seeing how we can leverage on those opportunities, and the whole role of research and development in decision making are some of the elements that were highlighted here. I think very central is how to draw and bring in low-income settlements as part and parcel of the city conglomeration, and or how water and sanitation is organized to deliver this very important resources and infrastructure to those communities, being central to this. So I'd like to conclude this panel discussion, very rich, and take the opportunity to thank each one of you, both who are here in person and colleagues who have joined us online, and wish you a very good evening and have an opportunity. I understand there will be a reception, and you can have a chance to speak further to the panelists on some of the issues they've raised here during the reception. So thank you very much, and back to you, Julie. Thanks.
Cecilia, thank you so much for leading this panel late into the evening, and to all the panelists and those who stayed with us physically in the room to hear this out. We have a few quick announcements. We're leaving immediately from the front to go to Idos, which is just around the corner, but it's not easy to find, so we might as well go together. Tomorrow morning, you are invited to indicate your interest in going on any of the field trips. There are a few spots left there, and it would be good to let them know at the front desk if you're interested in joining. And also, I was asked to mention that throughout the day, there's going to be a world skills competition training going on in the lobby, and that's always fun, so make sure you take a look at that. I think that's it for the announcements, and let's go and enjoy the evening. Thanks.